Yeah, so I was in the MOD, Glenn, and it was just when 9/11 happened. And I was a deputy director of the department. What we did in 9/11 immediately afterwards was to rewrite British defence policy. So, and that meant doing two essential things. So rewriting the overall structure of the policy, but also rewriting what were called the defence planning assumptions, which were how you restructure your armed forces. So I thought it'd be interesting just to have a bit of a conversation about how that restructure might take place. But also I was then lucky enough to sort of shoot off to places like Afghanistan and really see the policy in action. So what it gave me was a very probably unusual insight into how policy is made. As I look at the document, and I think it's a much more important document than most European conventional commentators realize, because as you say, most of the time they spend being outraged. But what they don't do is look in the more interesting subtleties of the document. And I think that if I had to guess who were the key architects, I would think that on the European and the rest of the world side, it would probably be Vance and Gabbard. And on the Americas side, it would probably be Rubio and Hegseth, and with Trump signing it off. Because I'm seeing what I would call a more sort of conventional neocon approach in the Americas and a more realist approach, I think, in the rest of the world, but particularly in Europe. But I'd also make the distinction between policy, strategy, and planning. Now, the document says that strategy is a plan. That's not right. Otherwise, strategy is a strategy. But the difference that I wrote about was essentially policy gives you an overarching sense of what a country wants to do and what it's prepared to invest. Strategy then takes that policy and tries to turn it into action. And it does by answering the how question. So how are we going to execute this policy? And then planning turns strategy into action. So that's the way that I think about it, and that's the way that I'll talk about these three things. But I think the first thing is the strategic context set out, because the Europeans have been looking narrowly at their own section and not looking more broadly at the overall context that the document's talking about. And what I think the document does is that it accepts that we've moved from a unipolar world, not to a multipolar world, but to a tripolar world. And I think the tripolar world is a bit of a nice sort of isosceles triangle, with America on one side, the United States on one side, and China and Russia much more closely on the other side. And I think what it also recognizes tacitly is that as a result of America's deindustrialization, they're now much less militarily powerful than they used to be. And I'm sure that this is the Pentagon actually starting to feed back to people and saying, look, we can't deliver as many 155 millimeter shells as we want. We can't probably conduct a long-scale campaign in the Western Pacific against China. So I think there's realism in there. But also, I think the other useful thing in terms of the strategic context is that they don't explain that the regional focus is on a priority order, but I think it probably is. So number one is the United States, and who can be surprised about that? Number two, though, is the Americas. And that's where America now is starting to see their vital national interests. Number three is Europe, although I think it'll be worth us talking about that in more detail. Number four is the Middle East. And I'm surprised that they're that way round, but I understand. And number five is Africa. But I think really what we're seeing here is a very different set of prioritizations from the American. And a number of principles, of which one of them struck out at me as non-interventionism, is the general approach. So you'll know much better than me that America has sort of zigzagged between interventionism and isolationism. And I think what we're seeing here is a move in America, not straight toward isolationism, but to much more nuanced intervention. An intervention where they think they have a chance of success, or they think it's likely to impact on their vital national security interest, and that doesn't seem to include the European and the Russia-Ukraine war. So I think the context is really important, and I think that unless you understand that these are Americans setting out their vital national interest, you're likely to do things such as the Europeans are doing, which are likely to act act 180% against America's national interests without realizing. So that means being a good ally. But shall I just stop there and let you come back?
Yeah. Well, I think that a mistake the Europeans do is perhaps what they did with the first Trump administration. They just said, well, he's just an old duck. Let's wait him out. Then we'll go back to normal, which apparently was then Biden. But I think Trump represents a much wider fundamental shift in the United States, which isn't, again, we always tend to assess intentions as opposed to capabilities, what the US actually can do. I mean, I think capability is what defines its intention. So again, what defined really the United States, as you said, is after the Cold War has been this hegemonic piece built into former security strategies, such as in 2002, when it made this point that the US security is, well, dependent on preserving the hegemonic status. That is, if you can dominate the world, then there won't be a great power rivalry, and this will essentially keep stability in the international system. Now, say what you will about this, either way, if you're for it or against it, it's kind of besides the point. That era is over. There's a new distribution of power, and you can't simply keep on pretending as if it's not. And I think this changes everything, because in the past there was whether if you were liberal in America, then you said, well, as long as we dominate, we can elevate human rights, advance democracy. They were for it. And of course, then you had the neocons, which just more into domination. They got it. So there was this almost unholy marriage who was saying, yeah, let's go for hegemony. And, you can make arguments for it and against it. But I guess my point is now that the US is the consequence of it over time would predictably be that the US exhausts itself economically, militarily, politically, and of course they would also incentivize this collective balancing. So I think now more and more in the United States they view hegemony as a burden, something that exhausts the US republic and makes them unable to compete with China. And so it's unsustainable. And if you look at where they are now compared to the 90s with $38 trillion debt, all these problems building up, it's not sustainable. So it's a very rational case you can make for why they would want to change course. Now, obviously, Trump isn't going to define America for the next few decades, but it is a transitional figure. So I think the Europeans delude themselves thinking that this is just a policy choice, a weird ideology,